Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound, but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. Each episode, my guest and I explore these time loops, one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the third stop at 1961's Season 2, Episode 26, Shadow Play. Here with me is my guest Austin Pryor from Malkovich Malkovich Minute Minute. How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And I wanted to take just a quick minute to talk about the decision that I made on the release order of this group of Shadow Play episodes. Because the first two Twilight Zone episodes, it was 3 different guests talking about the same episode. And with Shadow Play, there was a little bit of a difference at the end, the second repetition. So I decided to go ahead and, make a second episode for that part of the loop. And then we also have the 60s version and the 85 remake. But since it's still just the 2 episodes, I wanted to have at least a couple guests to talk about it, to stretch it out a little bit more. And I was going back and forth between, releasing the 2 60s episodes with Alice, and then releasing these 2 episodes, and then doing the 85 and the 85. But I thought it would be better to stick with Alice for 4 episodes, and also this peek behind the curtain. This is a bit of a last minute schedule change because my original guest dropped out, and I did have Austin scheduled to be on an episode, but originally I had him later.
So I got bumped up the schedule.
Yeah.
But no, you're very committed to your loops. I admire it. But so are you going to be doing? Yeah, you had 3 different guests for the first thing you're covering, but you're not having a third guest for Shadow Play, are you? Or
no, since I did stretch it out. Well, and especially since it's we're talking about the 60s and the
2
remake,
versions,
and they're so similar to each other. So I thought 8 episodes is plenty, and I thought that doing another 4 to make it 12 episodes, I thought that would be a little bit too much time.
It would be over the top. But it's just they should have been more considerate in structuring their episodes in a more podcast friendly way. They should have been thinking ahead in 1961. Come on guys, get it together.
Yeah, so I believe you said before we started talking that you don't really have any background with the Twilight Zone. Was that right?
Yeah, I have the same kind of cultural absorption of it. I was listening to Alice's episodes and she was talking about it. I'd be a bit more familiar with her just because I'm that bit older. I'm 41, so I've been marinating in the cultural juices for that long. so it's all there. And I mean, it's that thing, and I've talked about this in a couple of different podcasts, where when something is so big in the zeitgeist, you think you're more familiar with it than you are. So, the Rod Serling submitted for your approval, the strange case of blah, blah, blah. And you've just seen it in so many Simpsons, and, Tiny Toons did it, and and you just, you get it, you absorb it by osmosis, and you kind of go, yeah, Twilight Zone, I get it. I know the format, I know what it's like. And then just as soon as I watched this first 1961 episode, I was just so impressed at the format and how fresh it felt, and the it was absolutely of its time, but it does have a timeless quality at the same time. I love this era of television as well, and so I watch. I mean, if you look at my DVD shelf, it's kind of full of. Well, first of all, it's it's noteworthy that it has DVDs at all, in this day and age. But also that, just like the Criterion set the golden age of television, and I kind of see some of the an evolution of that era where TV in its infancy, but in the early days it was all about the Americans and the British and what they were doing. The first thing we see in this particular episode from 1961 is this close-up shot, and then we realize there's a man beside him, and then they, as the camera pulls out, we physically switch on lights. It's not any kind of optical effect or dissolve or anything. They physically switch on the lights in the studio, and I think it really does, because Alice mentioned this as well, that it feels like a set. And, you were kind of saying that that's really more down to just the production values of the time, which I'm sure it is. But I do think that they are drawing attention to the fact that it's a set by using this lighting effect and filling out. I was just bowled over. I was so impressed by it. And just because it was all shot on film and it's been well preserved over the years, and I was watching from the Blu-ray version of it, it looks so fresh. It looks like it was shot yesterday. And I was really kind of bowled over by it. And I'm dying to get into kind of the comparison between the two versions and stuff. But this era of TV ticks a lot of boxes for me.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. And I've already recorded a few episodes covering the Jordan Peele series. And in that, I use that as an excuse to watch more classic episodes. So in each episode where I'm covering one segment of the loop from the Jordan Peele episodes, I'm also having a brief discussion on a different time loop related Twilight Zone episode. And one of the ones that I watched was one of the small. They did I think 6 episodes on tape that they recorded on tape, and the difference in quality was night and day.
Yeah, because I think I thought that the 80s one was shot on video, but I think it's just the badly remastered, and it's just I'm watching it at DVD quality, and I think looking at it again, I think it was originally shot on film, but it just needs a good remaster.
Because I think the 80s version and the 2000s version are two of those series that just kind of have gotten lost in the culture, just because they weren't very popular at the time.
They don't have the same cultural importance as the original. And if I could choose one set of episodes to be better preserved than the others, that the way we have it would be the way I would choose. But it is a shame when you watch something so gorgeous looking from 1961, and then something that's more recent is like, oh, this looks terrible, and I'd love to see what they actually made.
So I am curious. You already started talking a little bit about your thoughts on the episode. But what did you think of this episode as a whole?
Yeah, well, so overall, I was really impressed with the production and the approach and the kind of it was cheesy in places because it was 1960s. So it was, some of the acting is a little bit ropey, but some of the acting is also amazing and just it really drew me in. And then, my overall impression was kind of affected by the fact that my cultural expectations, I can't conceive of a half-hour drama because TV has changed so much. You would never make this. If it's drama, if it's serious, it's, an hour long. So it's 42 minutes plus ads. So this is 23 minutes plus ads, so this is a 23-minute program, and I was watching it, and at the 23-minute mark, they started wrapping up, and I was like, what? Why is there a Rod Serling midway through the episode just kind of, is this coming into an ad break? And so then it just ends, and so that my expectations, because I don't know when they stopped, but nowadays it's very formal, the division, like if it's a half-hour slot, it's comedy. If it's an hour slot, it's drama, or lots of there are obviously lots of different genres, different slots, but those two like that. I presume the Jordan Peele Twilight Zone episodes are all 42 minutes.
Yeah, they're. I mean, they were designed
slot.
for streaming.
Yeah.
The CBS All Access, which is now Paramount Plus. So So the episode length varied a little bit, but it was typically about an hour each episode.
Yeah, it's for those kind of slots. Yeah. So that makes sense, and that's how you would do it. So that really threw me.
In the 1960s, the fourth season of the original Twilight Zone, they actually did change the format to hour-long episodes.
Right.
But at the time, they actually... It didn't work as well as they thought it would. I think they didn't get quite as good ratings, and I think most of those episodes, there's only a couple of them that are considered top-tier Twilight Zone episodes. And then for the fifth season, they went back to the half-hour format.
Interesting. That is, yeah. So I'll be dying to delve into it because it's like... Yeah, I did. I started to feel like, what the hell have I been doing in my life not watching the Twilight Zone? Because it was like, it really is. It's up my alley.
And I would definitely suggest watching more episodes because the 3 episodes that I covered with the time loop aspect, I really enjoyed, and they held up to repeated viewings. But at the same time, I think that they are mid-tier Twilight Zone.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a strange coincidence if anything that resembled a time loop happened to be the top tier episodes. It's because it's your brief is not doing best of the Twilight Zone. You're doing time loops or variations of time loops. Yeah. So I really enjoyed this, and I was definitely thrown by the running time, and. So were you saying, sorry, just to go back to your previous point, were you saying some of the 60s series were shot on videotape?
Yeah, in the third season, I believe it was, they were struggling with the cost of the series. And
right.
So they decided to, as a cost-cutting measure, to switch to videotape, which would have saved them like I think $5,000 per episode, something along those lines. But the quality of the episodes suffered so much, and it only saved them a relatively small amount of money that they only did that for. I think the number was like 6 episodes, and then they switched back to film.
Yeah, because nowadays the difference between film and video or film and digital cinema, which is a type of video as well, but just like the differences are kind of like they're almost just the aesthetic. Whereas back then it was a production difference. It mean, if you're shooting on video, well, that means we can't do anything outdoors. Now most episodes I think would just be kind of sound stages and indoors anyway, but like It dictates how the camera moves. It dictates the whole chain of production. Oh yeah, I could talk about film and television production for a long time, so I won't get into that too much. But I love this era for that reason. You're working around the technology, and the technology dictates so much of what you can do, and then people are getting creative with that.
Mm-hmm. So there were a few other details throughout this episode, and I'm imagining people listening to this episode also listen to the Alice Lauren episode, because I realize that we haven't really discussed what happens in the episode yet. But
we don't need all that.
But this is the main character, Adam Grant. He's basically sentenced to death and by electric chair, and he starts freaking out early on, and he tries to convince everybody that they're part of his dream, and then once he dies, then everybody else will die. And it plays around a little bit with that, but most of it follows Adam Grant. And I still think that it's interesting that even though the concept is that we're in Adam Grant's dream, there are scenes without Adam Grant in it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's like I kind of find I kept relating this as one naturally would to my own dreams, and yeah, like like you, I have had lots of dreams that are in that kind of third person, and where I'm feeling emotionally invested in the way I would be when I'm watching a movie, or I'm feeling the danger or the whatever the emotional stakes are. I'm feeling them at a remove, as if I'm observing. But then, you know, I find that any dreams that I can manage to remember, that's the other part of it. Any of those dreams where I can remember there was a shift from a POV, from like my own POV to a third person, that it's very fluid and strange, and the sense that I'm watching TV is replaced by the sense that I'm in the story, but there's still some vague sense that it is a story. You know, it's much, much messier than what we see here, which is cut to the jail cell, cut to the thing. And I mean, that's partly because, you know, you want to tell a story and you want to be, dreams are, you know, famously, you know, infamously hard to listen to, you know, somebody telling you their dream. So,
yeah, they tend to be very surreal. The transitions tend to be more implied than
exactly
anything else.
Yeah, and something people do an awful lot when they're telling you a dream is they'll kind of rationalize, and because it's the first time they're saying it out loud, so they'll do things like, oh no, we must have got in the car then, because then I remember we were there. I was like, no, you didn't get in the car. You know, you don't need to get in the car. It's a dream. You know, you didn't have to travel from there to there. And so kind of trying to relate their dream, and they're trying to tell it like it is a movie. It's not a movie. You know what I mean? You know, like,
yeah, I think the hardest part to describe in a dream is that there tends to be a lot of implied information that you just know. It's like you're in a scene and you know how all this stuff fits together when you're in that dream, and then it will shift and those implications will change. But whenever you're in the dream, it makes sense. But whenever you're describing it, it's like, you know, I was in the room with my brother, who was also my basketball coach for some reason, and then and I knew, and we were going on this journey, and you know, I knew that he was angry at me, and then and then in the next scene, it's like, and then all of a sudden, you know, he's still my brother, but instead he was my student for some reason. Like this aspect of his personality had changed, but it's all like whenever you're in the dream, it's all implied, and it's nearly impossible to vocalize.
Yeah, and the track that the dream is treading into your memory, the vast majority of the time, is so light that from one moment of the dream to another, you're not recalling, oh yeah, he was my basketball coach a minute ago. You know, you're not recalling that. It's just all flowing, and your mind is just giving you more stuff to look at and listen to, and that is like, people kind of don't get what their dreams are when they're trying to tell you, and it's funny listening to people do that kind of. I suppose people say I'm definitely thinking of like school days. I'm thinking of when you're a teenager and you haven't learned yet that nobody wants to hear your dreams. So I just, like, in this opening, I think I kind of missed the line when he says, "You're all a dream I'm having," or I thought, looking back, I think I heard him say it, but I didn't think it was literal. And we'll get to that when we're talking about the 85 version, because I loved how in the intro to this one, you really don't have it's not all laid out pat. You don't have this strong notion of what the premise of the episode is yet. But you know there's some kind of bending of reality.
Yeah, I think in this one he doesn't say that you're all a dream I'm having. He says that when I die, you're all going to die.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. And then I rewatched it, and he does actually say the line, "This is a dream I'm having," but he kind of shouts it, and he's half saying, and he's being dragged away, and so, my wife caught it when I was telling her. She only watched the start with me and stuff, and I was telling her what the premise was about, and she was like, "Yeah, no, he did say that in that version, because like you told me the story, and that wasn't a surprise to me, so he must have said it, So I checked, and she was right. So he does say it, but the very fact that I missed it, you missed it. First of all, it means my wife is a smarty pants, but also it means that that it's not emphasized, and you're not getting this kind of info dump in, an info dump doesn't belong in a cold open like that. It's not quite a cold open because it's not followed by the opening credits. It's followed by the Rod Serling intro. But this thing of putting Rod Serling in the set and you just move the camera and then he starts talking, that's really modern. I was really surprised that was used that way. I love that because I always pictured, and I think maybe I was thinking of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, that every single episode was just, there's a black void and Rod Serling walks into it and then starts giving his spiel. So again, I'm dying to watch the other episodes. Maybe there were episodes that were like that.
Yeah, I think they play around with it a bit, but because I can't really, I honestly can't recall how they do his narration in other episodes. I know in some of them they do cut to Rod Serling, because I think the other one that I can picture more clearly in my head is like the Death Ship, and because that takes place on a spaceship. So that one they definitely cut over to him, behind a blank wall, and then we get his narration, and then it cuts back to the rest of the episode. But yeah, I did notice that he was physically in the scene in this episode, and I also did appreciate that.
Yeah, it's done to great effect, and just what a guy, what a speaker, what a strange voice, great delivery. There's a style and an ease to it, and also just an eccentric kind of a feel. And like all of the impressions I've heard of him over the years, they never really get the accent right because he has this couple of odd little features of his accent. Like he says, his funny pronunciation of zone, for example, which is a rather important word. The Twilight Zone, and he sings zone. It's a really unusual way to say that word, and I love it. I love the. I could just, I'm a speech nerd, obviously, and I love listening to it. And I'm gonna, as soon as I'm listening, I'm like, oh, I need to peg being able to do that impression. You know what I mean? I need to pin that down.
Yeah, I do. I don't focus too much on accent.
Cadence, or
yeah. I try to focus more on the cadence rather than the accent.
Okay.
For these.
Yeah.
The way that I do my intros for this season.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I just love as well that, like, what a great surprise. If you cast your mind back to an audience who didn't know, I mean, I presume you got a list of time loop and time loop related things somewhere, and that's how you came across this episode. So you expected, but if you're watching it as an audience, who are just like, what's my story this week, would be like, not again, you won't kill me again. It's like, what a great hook, what a great line, and a great way to, like, what does he mean again? This guy can die more than once. And and then as it wears on, you realize, well, if this is his dream and he's aware it's a dream and he dies in it every time, then he's putting himself through this. And there's something really kind of chilling about that. And it's a very Twilight Zone idea, although I think it is some of the additions and wrinkles that are added to it in the 80s version do it favors to kind of enhance it and explore the idea a bit more.
Yeah, and I actually noticed a lot more of that this time around, and I'm looking forward to dive into that whenever we get to the 80s version. But there were a few other details that I noticed this time around here in this version, and he does talk about the fact that the cell and the way the prison is set up is because that's how he sees it in his mind, and yet at the same time he brings up details that he knows but are not in his dream. Like he talks about his cell neighbor has a watch, but he points out that he knows that prisoners aren't allowed to have watches because of the glass.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about this is something that does happen us when we start to I suppose we need to bring up lucid dreaming, because this is what this is. When you're in a dream and you become aware that it's a dream. And I get the impression that this guy has been having this recurring dream for so long that and in the early years when he's been having it, that he wasn't aware that it was a dream each time within the dream. That the awareness has come from the repetition, and that now he's saying, oh, there's another thing, they wouldn't allow glass in. So that, like, what happens in lucid dreaming is, I mean, I'm no expert on it or anything, but like, just from a subjective point of view, it really feels like one part of your mind is producing the images and the sounds and the ideas, and another part is kind of aware of them, Mm-hmm. So I think it's to do with, like, your frontal lobe is switching on when it technically shouldn't be, and that's kind of what brings in the awareness. But don't quote me on that. So that, like, so that's him being the observer. He's playing that role, the role of the person who's aware of the dream, pretty much all the way through, and then the people around him are unaware but starting to become aware, and that's the whole plot. And so they are the dream. They are the dream that's happening to him. And in the few occasions that I've managed to become aware in a dream and be able to do something about it, it does kind of slip through your fingers. Apparently some people can go into, like, I'm aware of a dream, now I can consciously produce any experience I want, and that sounds amazing, but I've never managed to do that. My awareness of a dream allows me to influence things very slightly, but I can't have this kind of omnipotent control over it. And I think that's what this episode does really well, which is, I'm aware of it, I can tell you, and he changes little things. He changes the steak to a roast, but for the most part, he's just like, it's just happening, and you'll ring, and you always call late, and that's that. And
I think it's interesting the way you say that. You always, come around this time. It's almost like he is, like you said, lucid dreaming, and I think that is the perfect description for what he's doing. But he hasn't developed the full level of control to where he can stop the repetition. But at the same time, I also think because he expects the repetition, then he also creates the repetition.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling.
Yeah. And there is one line that he says that I really love, that, whenever he's talking about, I think it's the moment whenever he's in the cell with the DA, and he says, a dream builds its own world.
Yes. Yeah. Which it does. Details fill them in as and when you need to fill themselves in as and when you need them. And, but again, that process does start to break down when you get into lucid dreaming, because as your more conscious interrogates the dream and asks these questions, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why is that there? Why is this happening? The dream does start to struggle, and it does, in my experience anyway, it's harder for the dream to feel real and to convince you and to draw you in, because it's not holding up, and it's the same as when you tell a dream, you're just saying it out loud now in your waking mind, and the person who's sentenced to listening to you is also awake. So it just sounds like incomprehensible nonsense, which is what it is. And that then the sensory stuff is kind of being added. That's what your mind is trying to create, something to match the emotion. Mm-hmm. That's my little pet theory anyway.
Yeah, and then there is one last little detail that I wanted to bring up. At one point we see that he's laying down asleep in his cell. So he's asleep in his own dream. Yeah. So do you think that he's having some an Inception style second level dream within his dream? Yeah. Like he's having this dream in his dream.
Well, I think of that, and I only thought of this afterwards, so I haven't studied the edit to see if this matches. But I think of that as he falls asleep in his cell, and then that's when he's dreaming of the third party stuff.
Oh yeah, that's actually.
And if I were making, yeah, if I were making this episode, I would kind of codify that and have it that whenever he falls asleep, that's when he sees, the other things happening. Because if it's all kind of happening in real time and the episode is a, reasonable representation of the dream, well, then nobody in the cell is saying anything while the scene is happening that's going on in the DA's house, So I think that's how I would kind of tidy that up. But you don't want to make it too tidy either, because I love the kind of what's he dreaming about? How does that work if he's asleep within his dream? Yeah. And and the kind of joke of, oh, did I wake you? But also still in that cell in the cells, in the jail bit, there's the song that the guy is playing on the harmonica is Red River Valley. I don't know if you noticed that or recognized that.
I actually, it wasn't a song that I recognized, and I didn't think to try to Shazam it or look it up.
I don't think Shazam would have got it. It just happened to be one that I knew from growing up, or I don't know how I really knew it, but it's definitely Red River Valley anyway. And that is a cowboy song, which plays into your idea of that this version of Adam Grant likes westerns, and that's why he. Oh no, you were saying that about the 80s one.
Yeah.
That's why it's a hanging, and it's more cowboys. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because they changed the song. It's Amazing Grace in the 80s one.
Yeah.
That is being played on harmonica. But I just as soon as I saw the guy playing harmonica, my kind of trope alarm or my cliche alarm went off, and I was like, yeah, but this is 1961, we'll give it a break. It wasn't as much of a cliche back then. And then they call it out, and it becomes part of the story that you're just, it's my fault, like everything else in this corny dream, you're just something I saw in a bad movie once, The fact that he's created this harmonica player in the jail cell is just a cliche from the movies that he has integrated into his dream,
Yeah.
So it's kind of I was already kind of giving license for the use of this cliche, and then I was like, oh, they don't even need it because it's totally integrated into the story. It's great.
Yeah, I love that part, but I think that's pretty much all I have for this version, unless you have any other notes that you wanted to bring up.
Couple of notes. So the guy, I think it's Phil, who's across the in the other cell. Yeah, he's like, look at that guy. A month ago he was a human being. Now what is he? An animal, a thing. And he's saying basically, don't let the walls close in on you. Don't let the kind of awfulness of your situation break you. But that is such a kind of relic of the 60s, 50s and 60s, that he's a thing, he's an animal. It's no, he's a traumatized human being. He's vulnerable, and he's dissociated, and he's kind of mad out of it. But that's a very, very human thing, and your man is not trying to be cruel or kind of to dismiss the humanity of his fellow prisoner here, but he is. It's an awful thing to say. And it's just amazing the way these you can watch the kind of mores of society change over time, and it's also this kind of fatalistic thing of well, he's gone as well. You know what I mean? That he can't, somebody can't be brought back from that, which of course they can,
Yeah.
One thing you could do is not kill them. That'd help. Abolish the death penalty. That would help his mental health. Then the description of the electric chair, I loved, this, like you were talking about with Alice, the way they do the kind of optical effects to create that.
Like the watery split screen.
Yeah. And Yeah, and then once we cut to the DA's house, I had the same problem as Alice described of like, who are these guys? Is that your man from the opening scene, and is this him in a flashback or something? And then it does all come together through dialogue, you know who everybody is and everything. But
Yeah, I still think it's weird that they chose the press editor as the second character.
yeah, you can see why they changed it for the 80s one. It is an odd one. I guess they're just kind of thinking about who's populating the court, and they're friends from court, and they they've kind of
maybe they thought that it would be too much of a stretch at that time to think that the prosecution and defense would associate after hours.
Yeah, because nowadays that would be quite commonplace in TV and in storytelling. But back in those days, Perry Mason was, he was the defense, and he never defended anybody who was guilty, and he was always, righteous and wonderful, and the prosecutor was always evil. Yeah, and it was a purely good versus evil thing. Whereas, in more modern TV, it's there's stories of power and the power struggle and kind of systemic failures and all of that. Who cooks steak in an oven? What the hell is going on there?
And not only that, but after she's cooking it, she decides to go to bed, and I noticed that it was 10 minutes till 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
When she's like, I'm tired of this. I'm gonna go to bed. The dinner will be ready in 5 minutes. And then instead of getting the dinner out, he goes to the jail, and then comes back. If he hadn't checked in the oven and it was still the steak probably wouldn't have been burnt to a crisp.
Yeah. It's like I've changed it to a roast so that your house won't be burning down. Although I did see her set a timer. I think it was a timer. Maybe it was just the temperature. But if it was a timer, then he's okay. The steaks will turn themselves off. But I was looking at that and was like, is she roasting the steaks? But like, it was more like on a grill, so they're not going to cook in their own juices, which is what I think of as roasting. They're going to bake. She's baking steaks.
Well, I think there is like on cooking shows, a lot of times what they do is they start it on the skillet in order to sear the outside, and then they will finish it in the oven.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I guess. Yeah, they did look sealed and seared, in fairness. They didn't look like they had been cooked all the way from that. So I guess the oven is just kind of keeping them at a good temperature. It's not doing the actual like cooking.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like I know anything about cooking, but I was like, baked steak. Don't like that.
All right, but I think that's pretty much all I have for this episode. But I'd like to thank you for joining me. And for anybody that hasn't heard you before, why don't you go ahead and let them know where they can find you online?
Yeah, so the podcast is Malkovich Malkovich Minute Minute. It is in the Movies by Minute podcast. It's in the Movies by Minute podcast format, rather. And so I'm sure most of the listeners here will be familiar with that format because there's a heavy crossover. So it's on a long hiatus, longer than I intended, but it is coming back, and I have continued to record. And so in the new year, it's going to come back. So if you want to join me, you can go to malkovichminute.net, and you'll see all the social links there. So malkovichminute.net. I didn't want to make everybody type out Malkovich Minute every time. And the links are there, and there's 25 episodes up so far, and 5 different sets of guests, and it's been a lot of fun. And for the last few months, I've just been guesting on loads of different podcasts, so I'm enjoying myself.
And as always, I'm Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstitesandmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubbawheat, and you can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group where you can join and discuss episodes as they come out, and also have conversations about anything time loop related whatsoever. And so until next time, I will still be right here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Adam Grant, a nondescript kind of man found guilty of murder and sentenced to the electric chair. Like every other criminal caught in the wheels of justice, he's scared, right down to the marrow of his bones.